Welcome to the Filmanalysis, today with Jud Süß by Veit Harlan. This is the most famous and the least seen propaganda film, best known among the 20 million Germans in the 1940s who saw it, especially in 1940 when this film was released. This film is powerful. It's not free of a certain aura. That is certainly also since it couldn't lose its aura by showing it, by dealing with it, because it is a reservation film. That is why it is the most unknown propaganda film in Germany. Only in special screenings with introductions and discussions can this film be shown in Germany, so it is not available on DVD, but there is a certain anachronism to it. In the age of the internet, this film can of course be found everywhere. It is pushed back and forth everywhere, uploaded. In other countries it is not banned. Is it still in keeping with the times to continue to speak of unreserved film and thus prevent viewing? This film doesn't just belong on television, but it can be classified and, above all, it can be studied to draw conclusions from it. As for anti-Semitism today, this is certainly the Nazi anti-Semitism, the Nazi anti-Semitic propaganda film par excellence. So studying the film would be instructive. 20 million people have seen it. 20 million people who already had an anti-Semitic attitude for the most part. The film goes beyond clumsy propaganda. It cleverly foists this propaganda on the audience. Jud Süß combines this propaganda with familiar narrative forms. The film mixes melodrama and historical drama, also a bit of a vampire film. This film has an excellent cast. Many have lent their talents to the abuse of this film. Heinrich George as the Duke, Ferdinand Marian as the title character, Josef Süß Oppenheimer, and Werner Kraus playing several different Jews. Christina Söderbaum, even though her acting talent is not all that great, but she was the wife of Veit Harlan. Veit Harlan was a very talented director who, in addition to propaganda films, also created films that were never entirely free of Nazi ideology, but which can nevertheless also be considered great works in terms of film aesthetics. It's not hard to see in Veit Harlan's Opfergang aesthetic connections to Douglas Sirk and Rainer Werner Fassbinder. At the end of Jud Süß, the Jewish title character is executed. And this film is also to be understood as a call to action. Now, casualties are always such a thing. If you see A, does B follow? Questionable, especially since the film produces certain ambivalences. But it was a breeding ground for the Nazis' ideology of extermination. There is extensive research on this film, but also on the historical figure, namely Josef Süß Oppenheimer. Here, however, we will now mainly deal with the aspect of economics in the film. In Jud Süß, the Jewish main character, representing all Jews, is held responsible for something for which not he, but the system is responsible. This film works according to the scapegoat principle. The film begins in 1733, when we see Karl Alexander become Duke of Württemberg. He swears by the constitution. Later we see how he will become unfaithful to it. And we see right away that this Duke is not a decent good citizen. He is still from aristocratic times, lustful and decadent, and he needs money for his escapades. There is the antithesis to this decadence, Faber and his wife Dorothea. She is the daughter of the landscape consultant. They are well behaved, so well behaved that they are even chaste after the marriage is consummated. From the beginning, an opposition forms. On the one hand, the bourgeois, virtuous society the Swabians against the aristocratic decadence. Soon this links up with Jewish decadence through Joseph Süß Oppenheimer and the father Sturm, the father of Dorothea, who is also the good, brave German enjoying his Sunday dinner according to his heart and otherwise, of course, never has anything evil in mind. Well, there is a scene in the Judengasse in Frankfurt where Joseph Süß Oppenheimer lives ghettoized and is not part of civil society. But now he is supposed to get jewelry that the Duke can give to the Duchess. And besides, the Duke also needs money. Can't he help? And Oppenheimer says yes, but I need permission. I must have permission to travel to Stuttgart because there is a ban there. Jews are not allowed to travel to Stuttgart. Then the king's assistant, the king's envoy, tells him yes, that should be all right, that he should be given permission. But because of the way he looks at the moment, that is not possible. And then, a little bit later, we watch Oppenheimer driving the carriage and suddenly he looks totally different. He has shaved his beard, he has taken off his kaftan, much to the displeasure of his assistant Levi. But Oppenheimer justifies this. He says, I'll open the door for all of you in velvet and silk, you will go. Here, the film thematizes the assimilation of Jews. Jews who want to be part of civil society and therefore do not carry around the usual insignia of Jewishness. These assimilated Jews, as they said, were a particular thorn in the side of the Nazis. They were concerned with rendering Judaism, the Jews, visible, which is why the Nazis also introduced the yellow star. Now they feared that if the Jews are invisible and part of civil society, they could become dangerous. This anti-Semitic fantasy shapes the film. On the journey to Stuttgart, Oppenheimer meets Dorothea as if by chance and they talk. At first it seems non-committal about traveling, where he has been in France, Paris, here and there. Then she asks him, doesn't he have a homeland? And he answers, yes, the world. And she can't believe it at all. We clearly see the cliché of the uprooted Jew, quote unquote, the eternal Jew traveling the world, not at home anywhere, and who therefore does not fit into Nazi ideology, into German culture. This cliché, this antisemitism that is served here, has always been connected to a development of modernization that this film completely denies, also denied by the Nazis. Georg Simmel described this in his philosophy of money. The fact that we have money as a modern means of exchange, that we can sell our labor power, sometimes here, sometimes there. I could work here today and in Paris tomorrow, means that we are detaching ourselves from family structures, from clan structures, also from cultural and national structures and roots. And in a way, we are uprooted by this modernization, uprooted people, a great advantage as it carries a certain liberal freedom. But the film is decidedly anti-modernist and therefore brands this civilizational progress as something Jewish. As Oppenheimer arrives in Stuttgart, he is immediately recognized by Dorothea's fiancé. Faber sees him with a piercing gaze. He says, "But that's a Jew." Sheer hatred now strikes Oppenheimer, but he reacts very politely and gallantly. We must look at the scene in two ways. On the one hand, an audience in 1940 that is preconceived anti-Semitically, that perhaps looks at Oppenheimer in the same way as Faber, with the same rage. At the same time, however, Oppenheimer's politeness is so great, his gallantry so strong, and the way he behaves towards Dorothea, they are so distinguished that one can say, well, is that really the case here, that the sympathies were all with Faber in 1940? It's all very questionable. We can only trace this reception history with difficulty. We can only note one thing. Even such a perfidious propaganda film sometimes produces a surplus. Some scenes produce a certain ambivalence that was perhaps not foreseen or intended by the script writers, the director, and Goebbels, who was behind the whole project. But they do exist nonetheless. A work is also cleverer than the author sometimes. In this respect, when we look at this scene from today's perspective, our sympathies naturally lie with Oppenheimer and not with this mad Faber. Then there is this discourse about the Duke's expenses. The Duke would not only like to have a guard, but he would also like to have an opera and a ballet. And Oppenheimer agrees with him, but there are the estates administering this conservative Germanism, and this old feudal economic order is opposed to it. In principle, one could also read ambivalences into this. These estates are completely uncultured, and it is only right to have an opera and a ballet in a modern state. Oppenheimer now suggests to the Duke to get money out of Württemberg. That is, taxes should be taken, for example, for roads or something that have been paid for. A modern state is a state which takes taxes. So the citizens could pay taxes for that too. The Duke goes into debt with the merchant Oppenheimer for this and that. In return, he makes a deal so that Jews are no longer banned from Stuttgart, but are allowed to enter, and there is also a quid pro quo. Oppenheimer takes over the administration of these Württemberg roads and takes a toll. Immediately afterwards, there is a scene with a simple merchant who says, yes, but then my business is no longer worthwhile. I must pay everywhere now. Selling my goods is no longer worth it. Then the secretary Levi shows up and tells him, well, you must add the toll to the price. That too is connoted as something quite Jewish in the scene, but one should add, yes, of course, costs that you have in the production of goods or in transport or whatever are added to the price. That's how modern economics works. And afterwards, in the house of Sturm, you can already tell where the whole thing is heading. Food is becoming more expensive. There is a threat of inflation. So here again, the good farmers and traders, the Germans, are set against the Jewish taxes. In general, the fact that taxes are taken is seen as something evil. Today, in some diffuse bubbles, one suggests taxes to be left, and the land estates, they embody the good Germans here, the supposedly good German capitalists. It is the capitalists, the industrialists, who also made pacts with Hitler in 1933 and did not skim on anti-Semitism. And you can read about this excellently in studies, but also in the novel The Order of the Day by Eric Vuillard. It shows very well how German big business behaved. High national debt threatening also inflation, even though Jud Süß is set in the 18th century. He refers to the Weimar period, although today we know that it was not inflation, but deflation that helped the rise of the Nazis. And one also repeatedly becomes aware of a Jewish figure who is presented as a vampire, so to speak. And that too has been an anti-Semitic tradition since the 18th century, that Jews are shown as the ones who suck the blood out of the supposedly good Germans. We still have such a discourse even today when we think of the European Central Bank. A few years ago, there was an article in the right-wing Bild newspaper about Mario Draghi, the former head of the ECB. There was a picture of Draghi depicted as a vampire. The message was clear: Count Draghi robbing money from the good German savers. Propaganda in this film takes place primarily through emotionalization. In the second part of the analysis, we will see how emotionalization aims to blind the audience so that they only watch but do not see. It would be nice if you would like to support the film analysis financially. You can do so via my bank account or PayPal. Also, you can find me on Patreon. Thank you very much.